title, but what it all boils down to is the initial one, the authentic historicalness, which is something is a term I borrowed from Heidegger, which I came across rather late. But what it really, authentic historicalness, means for me at least, is what I try to explain underneath is making history our own. And the way I think we do it, or the model I try to propose, is this existential developmental kind of understanding I have been working on for quite a few years. But I want to give you a little bit of history again in terms of how this came about. So in 2015, I had the honor to have a presentation at the First World Congress called Thrones, Freedom, and the Will for Authenticity. And I gave that presentation because what I was struggling with at the time, but not only at the time, I think I was struggling with that question since I was a teenager, is that I wanted to be free. I wanted to feel that I was determining my life and that I was not determined by my biology or by my upbringing. But was I? Because as I grew older and went through therapy and all of that, I was realizing more and more that, of course, I was thrown, as existential theory says, into a whole set of circumstances that were beyond my control, that I had no choice about, except if, and I did contemplate for a while on the thought that maybe we do have reincarnations, and maybe I have chosen the body in which I was born in, and maybe I had even chosen the family that I was born into, and so on and so forth. But the difficulty is that because I'm a Westerner and I'm too much dependent on logic, it did appeal, the theory did appeal to me, but I wasn't sure that this could be the case. So I was struggling with, how can I be free although I'm determined? And I gave a lot of emphasis on willpower. So whoever was in the round table, the symposium with Amy Van Dorsen on existential courage, I talked a little bit about the fact that we're not born with willpower, but it is something that we train, and that it is something that we learn how to use, that our willpower. But this whole idea of how can I be free within my thrownness sort of came to more of a reconciliation when I read about Heidegger's idea of authentic historicalness. And I think that what therapy is, for me at least, is this effort to embrace our life story, is to make our life story our own. Whatever has been thrown to us is part of who we are. We cannot escape from it, but we can come to terms with it, and we can make peace with our life story, and we can even honor our life story and treasure a lot of the things that have happened, and also be able to, in some ways, digest those that were very unfortunate things, and we all had unfortunate things happen to us, and some of us are more traumatized than others, but So, and this is how I understand also what Heidegger means when he talks about choosing our fate. That in some ways we choose our fate by really making, I think Emmy Van Dorsen talked a little bit about that yesterday in her keynote, making the best that we are. And this is where I also thought that she was not very far from the humanistic theory of self-actualization of Maslow. Because I think he was the first one to talk about self-actualization and how we can actually fulfill, or at least try to fulfill, as much of our potential as possible. Because existential guilt, I think, is all about not being able to fulfill all of the potentialities, but at least to fulfill some of our potentialities. So we have our biological DNA. We are born in a body, and tomorrow I will be really nice for the first time being in a round table talking about embodiment. But we are our bodies, okay, and we carry this biological DNA. But I also think that we have this, what I call the psychic DNA, or psychological DNA. When I was able in 2002 to present this concept called the DNA of the soul at the Second World Congress of Psychotherapy in Vienna. And I have been working on that since I was in graduate school, in my effort to really understand how I grew up and what were the influences I received from my family. And I also had a very good teacher, a very good professor at college that was teaching developmental psychology, and I fell in love with developmental psychology. So I studied a lot of developmental psychology, and I tried to integrate different theories. So I'm not going to get, of course, into the model because it would take a very long time. But I just wanted to say a few words about what is the DNA of the soul and why did I choose that term. For me, it is really an allegory for this kind of an ingrained way that our experiences have sort of stuck on our skin. It is who we are. We can't erase our lived experiences. They are there. And the beautiful book, The Body Keeps the Score, I think says it all. Everything is stored in our body and in our lived experiences. So for me, our experiences while growing up in our family form this kind of psychic DNA. And I used also the allegory of the DNA to try to make a synthesis of as many theories as I knew at the time. I was very much influenced by Freud, I was very much influenced by Bowlby, by Mahler, and of course by Winnicott, and all of the ideas that were very important for me that came from Erik Erikson and from his theory of psychosocial development. So I tried to make an integration of all of these theories. And I used the DNA because it is a helix. And for me that was an important notion because I don't think that development is kind of linear, but it is more like, and this is how it felt for me in therapy, this is what I hear very often my clients bring, but I'm again dealing with the same issue. I'm again dealing with my mother, and I'm again dealing with my father. And yes, it feels very often that we go around and round in dealing with certain issues, but my impression is that we are dealing with them at different levels at each time. And you can either see it as going deeper or going higher, it doesn't matter, right? But we sort of move around certain core issues that are important and have really been stuck in our skin. But we are in a process, we're in a continuous process of becoming who we are today, right? And of constantly integrating and reintegrating everything that comes along in our way. And I also chose the double helix because it feels like, or it felt like, there was the positive and the negative, the fruitful and the not so fruitful outcome in this struggle. But as I'm getting older and I'm working on it more and more, I see it more as a dialectical tension between two poles that are there and will always be there, and that we are constantly renegotiating our position. And I will say a little bit about this because I had the opportunity to publish recently an article in the Journal of the Society of Existential Analysis exactly about this dialectical tension between some of our basic developmental themes. And what are these primary dialectical tensions? Mm-hmm. I think that we are born connected, right? We are connected physically with mother during pregnancy, with the umbilical cord, and when we come out of the womb, this bond, this connection is being cut. And it's the first time that we need to take a breath on our own and to be separate beings physically. But this process of separation will continue throughout our life. And we're constantly trying to be our own person, to be who we are, to exist. I think Alfred Young made that distinction, to really exist as our own being, emotionally, and not just physically. And of course there are factors that facilitate this process and factors that hinder this process. But we are constantly in a dialectic and in a tension between me and other, right? Between also our need and desire to be independent and self-sufficient, and our desire for connection and togetherness. And we struggle as to where we are in that continuum. And I think that either extreme, we could say, is pathological or dysfunctional, or however you will call it. And what we're trying to find is somewhere where there is, in my mind at least, somewhat of an integration, somewhat of a balance between these two poles. And of course, we're also struggling between the pole of efficiency and deficiency. Am I sufficient? Am I okay? How am I doing with my life? And also with a lot of self-doubts. And we see that also in our practice. I think that we constantly struggle with the idea, am I good? Do I know what I'm doing? Am I a good therapist? Or do I should change profession? Maybe I'm not really meant to be for this kind of work. So there is always a sort of, again, a dialectic between feelings of sufficiency and feelings of deficiency. And again, we try to find somewhat of a balance between the two. And I think that these paradoxical dilemmas are integral to our being. It is not something we can really escape from, but we just constantly renegotiate them. And again, we move between feelings of groundlessness and insecurity and feelings of attachment and security, feelings where we really need well with ourselves and connected with others, and we feel trust, mistrust, and we're constantly struggling to really find a meaning, to really try to be more of ourselves, so there seems to be a movement between two things. So there is a question about how can therapy really provide for a corrective emotional experience, a term that I have borrowed from Franz Alexander. He talked about corrective emotional experience. And I do think that one of the most important things that we're struggling to achieve in terms of reclaiming our life and gaining ownership of our lived experiences is to rebuild our sense of trust. And for me, the restoration of trust is a cornerstone for psychotherapy, as it is a cornerstone for Erickson for the development of hope, the virtue of hope as children through our bond with mother. And now we know from neuroscience that it was proven that a secure bond, a secure attachment makes infants to be more self-regulated and to be able to handle stress and situations in a very different way. And of course, it also helps us as adults. When we are self-regulated, we are at our best. Right? It's when we lose our balance and when we panic that things start to go wrong. Right? And I think that the therapy world can be a world where this kind of trust in the other, but also in ourselves, can be somehow restored. We can find again some sense of safety and security that we will survive. I think Emmy brought that yesterday too, that we will survive under all of these difficult circumstances that life throws to us constantly. Right? And this is, I think, what was so powerful with the pandemic and with all of these situations that we are living right now that are creating all this sense of uncertainty. Are we prepared to face the uncertainty of life? And how do we face the uncertainty of life? Because it's a given that, as Ernesto Spinelli says, this is one of the basic things that is there, that life is uncertain. But we need to feel safe. And how do we feel safe? What is there? Is there any magic trick to make us feel safe? I think one of the things that can make us feel safe is really believing that we can survive, that we can make it through the day, that we can make it through difficult circumstances. So therapy is there to restore that kind of belief in the other and in who we are. And Luis Cozzolino, in his book, The Neuroscience of Psychotherapy, writes, the powerful shaping experiences of childhood can be modified through subsequent personal relationships, psychotherapy, and self-awareness. A healing environment, such as good enough psychotherapy, in which trauma is processed and resolved, supports this reintegrative process. So, the existential dilemmas that we're dealing with is me, other, freedom, security, self-worth and efficiency, self-doubt and deficiency. And we will be constantly struggling with these existential dilemmas. But as Carl Jung says, no tree, it is said, can grow to heaven unless its roots reach down to hell. So this is our challenge, to be able to dig into our roots and find all that is there, good and bad, positive and negative, frustrating and not frustrating, and to really grow and become more and more of who we are, and to really reach our spiritual level as creatures that we can be.